112a, Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, towards the top. Hold on a second. What's this? Okay. So the Gemara says we're holding. It's part of the mission. We're talking about again the city, the Ir Hanidachas, the city that turns to idol worship, where we say there's a majority of the people in the city that make up of the city that have to turn to idol worship. We're on page 112a, and they and then the punishment changes, because idol worship on its own is punishable by, just to get we haven't learned in a while, is punishable by stoning, skila, and your property goes to those who inherit you. Whereas in Ir Hanidachas, the city of idol worship, is the punishment, the death penalty punishment. It's a communal that the whole city, majority of the city turns to idol worship. So the punishment is less severe. It's by the sword, sayif, which is much less severe than the stoning. We learned before in the beginning of Sanhedrin that stoning is considered the harshest of death penalties, hey Bruce and Danny and Barbara. But so you get beheaded, but we're on page 112a, but your property gets burnt. Okay, so now we have to decide what makes up a majority of, hey Aaron, what makes up a majority of the city? Who can be counted to make up the majority of the city? There's a lot of people that are in a city. Doesn't necessarily mean that they get counted as a majority of part, that the city, meaning that the residents or the inhabitants, those people who live in the city, are a majority. You can have people that are passing through, our guests, the tourists, etc. So the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have learned, Hachameres v'hagalemes hagameles, the people that travel, the peddlers. Those that the peddlers were known as those who travel by donkey, or those who go through by gamal. The camel is more the caravan. So the caravans and the peddlers that go ha'iveres mimakim l'makim, they travel from city to city. Means they're never really a resident in any specific place. Let's say they rested in a city and they got taken with the, so to say, the spirit of the city in a negative way to idol worship. So they were also instigated. Hudachu means they were instigated by the instigators. Again, we have all the conditions we learned so far. There has to be two people, two men, etc., members of the city. So these people passing through, which are the peddlers and the people from the caravan, also get instigated to serve idols. So the question is, can we count them as either to create a majority or minority? Means if they don't, do they help in the minority, to make it that there's less people, so therefore there's only minority that were instigated? Or then if they get instigated, do they add to the majority? So the Gemara says this is a question of what decides halachically if a person is considered a resident or a citizen of a city. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, the Brisa says, Im nishtahu sham shleishim yaim, if they travel and they kind of set up camp in the city, so to say, for 30 days they lived in the city. So then, hein b'sayif, they get punished with the sword, and they lose umamanan, and their money, their valuables of it gets lost like the rest of the city. So there's two questions here. One question is how, if they contribute to the majority or minority. The second question is, if let's say there's already a majority, but they also join, so to say, the majority, are they considered residents of the city to get the same verdict? Let's say you have 100 people in the city, Bonagid. So you have 70 people that from the residents of the city that were instigated and serve idols. Comes in a group of a caravan or peddlers come through. They also, unfortunately, join their narrative and the rhetoric, and they serve idols. So are they considered as part of the city and therefore they get the same punishment as the city? Or are they just individuals who get stoning? Pachis mikem, if they're in the city for less than 30 days. So even though the city itself is considered a city of idol worship, nevertheless, Haim Beskila, as they get judged as individuals, unlike the rest of the residents of the city, they get stoned, which is the more severe punishment. And in the same time, umemonyan paleit, their money, their valuables doesn't get burnt, they get spared and goes to the people who inherit them. Okay, so he's going to quote now, Reb Steinsaltz is going to quote now. I'm not sure why the Gemara doesn't have the same question with regard of these people actually contributing to making up the majority of the city. It only talks about if there is a majority, if they get punished with the majority. Obviously, if there's a minority and everyone's getting stoned, so they would get stoned, it seems like. And doesn't seem like the Gemara is even considering that they would actually contribute to the minority. Let's see. Chameres v'galmeles, a person who's either traveling as a peddler, which is they traveled by donkeys, or a caravan. So the caravan of donkeys and the caravan of camels. If the members of a caravan that was passing through an idolatrous city were subverted to idolatry along with the inhabitants of the city. So he's quoting from the Rambam. If their stay was 30 days or longer, their status is like that of the inhabitants of the city. They're executed by the sword, which means it's seemingly a lesser of a punishment, like we said, and their property is burnt. If their stay was shorter than 30 days, they are stoned to death, which is skila, and their property is spared. So the Rambam in Sefer Hamada, again, only addresses the question if it seems like we have to check the Rambam separately, but it doesn't seem like the question is if they make up or they add or take or distract from or subtract from the minority of the city. But if the city is getting punished and it's already a majority, if they're there for less than 30 days, they still don't get the same punishment. So they're just like people who pass through, and there's as individuals who served idols who get stoned. Obviously, they had warning and all witnesses, etc. But nevertheless, they get stoned and the property is spared. Where if they stay 30 days or longer, then they get the same punishment of the city. Okay, so in general, this idea of what makes a person a resident or a citizen of a city is not just about idol worship. So it's about taxes and other costs of the city, if you have to contribute or not. So here the Gemara is going to ask a question from the laws of city taxes. Or Aminu, the Gemara asks a question. How long does a person have to pass to be in a city to be considered? It doesn't make a difference if you're a caravan or a visitor, what have you. To come to the city to be considered like a person of the city. So the Gemara says 12 months. So why does it say over here that it's 30 days? That if they're 30 days there, then they get punished like the city, meaning to say they get the sword and the property gets burnt. Whereas when the Gemara asks about what's the definition of a person who's like Anshe Ir, the people of the city, is 12 months. So Rav explains, like Kasha, there's a difference if they are considered citizens of a city or residents of a city. 30 days makes you a resident, and therefore you have only certain responsibilities, and 12 months makes you a citizen. Again, there's Rashi. Let's see Rashi. This is a Mishnah in Baba Basra. Those who went to my father's Baba Basra class have learned this, that in the laws of Baba Basra, where we talk about the responsibility a person has as a resident or a citizen of a city. So the Gemara says, how long do you have to be in the city to be Anshe Ir? Lite mitzarcha Ir, to give to the taxes of the city. So the Rava says there's a difference to be kibnei masa, she a nikra kibnei ha'ir, to be like a citizen. A nikra b'pachas miyad beis chodesh. You're not considered as a citizen if you're there than less than 12 months. Avali karetz miyoshri, to be a resident of a city. Kivin sheshal lamid yom, if you're there 30 days. Nikra mi'anshe ir, you're considered a resident. V'karinu b'hu es yoshri irahu, and therefore you're considered as if the people of the city, and you get punished like the people of the city if you're there 30 days. And the people of the city are getting the sword, you get the sword and your property gets burnt. Again, he quotes the Rambam in Sefer Kinyan. One is considered the citizen of a city and is obligated to give charity and pay taxes in the city after having stayed there for 12 months. So the Rambam says that when do you become a full resident, as full citizen in a city, is if you're there 12 months. Bruce. What's the law in the United States? When do you become a is it also we wait 12 months or when you register? You're on mute. One second. You're on mute. Hold on, Bruce. You're on mute. How do I unmute you?
There we go. Got it. When you buy a house, you pay taxes on it no matter how long you've lived there. But for voting, I don't know what the rule is. I think it depends on state law.
Oh, so each state goes according to what their rule is.
Correct. It's not a federal law.
Not a federal law. Okay, thank you. So here he's saying that for the taxes and tzedakahs, the charities, you have to be 12 months. So Rava answers the status of one who had stayed in a city for 12 months is that of a citizen of a city. And the status of one who stayed in the city for 30 days is more is like that of an inhabitant or resident of a city. There is a halachic difference between an inhabitant and a citizen with regard to both taxes and the case where one vowed that deriving benefit from a citizen or an inhabitant is forbidden. Meaning to say, if you say, I don't want to, we're going to learn now the next law. If a person says that, let's just first learn it and then we'll apply what the Rambam was saying. Vatanya, this is not a question, even though the word usually vahatanya means a question, but like Rashi says, b'nichusa, it's just bringing proof to what we said. That hamoider hanomi b'nei ir, if someone says, I vow not to have any pleasure from people who are citizens or residents of a city. So how long does a person who lives in a city have to be part of the city, meaning that you vowed that you wouldn't take any pleasure? So im yesh adam means you can't eat in their house, you can't ask them to do you a favor, etc. Is im yesh adam shenishta hasham shnei masachodesh, if a person lives there for 12 months, asher lehenisman, you can't have any pleasure from that person. That person, you can't take any joy from that person because you said that I don't want to have any joy from a person who lives in that city, and the person lived there for 12 months. If a person is residing in the city less than 12 months, you could take pleasure from that person because he or she has not become yet a proper citizen of the city. If he says, I'm making a vow not to take pleasure from the residents of the city. So there's a difference in yoishve and b'nei. B'nei means you're actually a citizen. Yoishve means you're a resident. If the person is there for 30 days, then again, you can't take pleasure from the person because you took a vow from the residents of the city. And a residence is 30 days. Less than 30 days. If a person is just passing through, then spend the night in Manhattan doesn't mean that you're not going to take. You don't have to take pleasure from them. It's more to lehenis many than you can take pleasure. So this is what the Rambam is referring to. That we said it before, that there's a difference between a resident and a citizen. And when it comes to the city of idol worship, so in order to get the punishment of the city, meaning to be part of the majority that gets the sword and loses its property, it's only 30 days. It's a resident of a city. And it's not required to be a citizen of the city, meaning to be there for full 12 months. Again, it doesn't say here, and I don't see in the commentaries on the side here and that I have, why we're not discussing the question of actually helping to make or to make it the majority. Okay. Tanya Rashi says b'nichusa. That's not a question. It's just we bring the brisa as a support. It's why it has to put it in that way is another question. Maybe it's okay. Let's go further. A person who takes a vow that I will not take pleasure from residents or citizens of a city. So it depends what you say. If you say b'nei ha'ir, so basically in the Hebrew term, b'nei ha'ir mean these are people of the city. Yoshvei ha'ir means someone who resides, sit. Yoshev means to sit, to settle. Like Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz meguri aviv, right? Yaakov moved, he didn't become a citizen of Shechem, but Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz meguri aviv. So there's a yeshiva, and then there's to be a citizen of the city. It's not the same thing. It applies to the laws of vows and it applies to the laws of taxes. All right, that finishes that question. The Gemara continues. You have to destroy everything of the city after you kill. Again, so let's just recap of this story because again we haven't learned in a while. So the idea is like this: the city of idol worship has to be when a person serves idols as an individual, then the punishment with warning and witnesses is stoning, and your property goes to those who inherit you. If it becomes a city of idol worship, and with all the conditions that we said before, instigated by members of the city, etc., all the conditions we said, then the punishment is lesser. I mean, it's the punishment of the sword, but the city, everything in the city gets destroyed. Meaning Aaron, if you want to ask something, ask it on the chat. It's hard for me to read the WhatsApp when you could ask it on the chat of the Zoom. It's hard for me to read it through the WhatsApp. So if you are a resident, if it's the sword, so if it's a majority, then you get punished by the sword, which is beheading, and but your property gets burnt. They destroy everything. Now, what happens if you're not part of the majority? Aaron, you wanted to ask something?
No, I wanted to answer your question, but give me 1 second. Okay, it says this. I looked up your question. To become a resident in the U.S., the time frame depends on the definition of residence. For tax purposes, the substantial present test requires being in the U.S. at least 31 days in the current year and 183 days over a 3-year period for naturalization. But then I won't read everything. But then it says tax residence for non-citizens. You were physically present for at least 31 days in the current year, and you will be physically present for a total of 183 days during the current year and 2 preceding years, calculated as all days in the current year plus 1/3 of a day in previous years, plus 1/6 of a day in the year before that. So,
Okay, so we see similar kind of breakdowns of the
but
31.
if you want to become a citizen of the United States, it's 3 to 5 years to actually get a citizenship.
Mhm. Thank you, Aaron.
Okay.
So the punishment. So again, the punishment is that. But then, what about if you're a righteous person? Meaning, when we say tzaddik over here, we don't mean a holy person. We mean you're not part of the group. You didn't serve idols. You live in a city. There's 100 people. 65 served, 35 didn't. So you don't get killed. You didn't serve idols, but your property that's in the city gets burnt as well. So we say the hachrim. You have to destroy Isa, the city. V'skol asher ba, anything in the city. So now the rabbis learned. What does that mean? Hachrim oisev eskol sharba. What does it mean to destroy everything in the city? Prat lenichnese sadikim shebechutzela. If a person is righteous, meaning to say that the person did not serve idols and has property outside the city, not in the city, outside the city, so that the righteous person's property outside the city doesn't get spared, doesn't get destroyed. That's what it means, oisa, only it. V'skol HaSharba, that's in the city. V'skol HaSharba, the rabbis also nichn tzadikim shebetoichai. So we have Oisa is coming to teach us that only the property of the righteous, outside the city gets spared. But the property of the righteous inside the city is destroyed. So a righteous person who has any property in the city, that gets destroyed along with the city. Shalala means the spoils. V'lo shlal shamayim means anything that belongs to heaven, meaning to say that belongs to Hegdish, belongs to the sanctuary or to the temple, doesn't get destroyed. We'll learn what happens to it. V'eskol shlal l'rabis nichnesei rishayim shebechutzela. And the word eskol shlala, all the spoils, adds that the wicked, those who are wicked, meaning those who served idols, who get killed, their property outside the city also gets destroyed. So we basically have 4 categories. We have the spoils of the righteous, meaning the people who haven't served idols. Their property in the city gets destroyed. Their property outside the city is spared. We have things that belong to Hegdish, to Shemayim, meaning to heaven, to God, which we'll see what defines as that. What's defined as that? That doesn't get destroyed because it doesn't belong to the individual. What about the property of the wicked? Their property gets destroyed along both in and outside the city. Okay, that's what the Brises teaches us. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Hachrim oisa prat lenichin say sadikim shebechutzela. It comes to say oisa means to say that it excludes the righteous people. Again, righteous here means someone who did not serve idols outside of the city. Their property that's outside of the city does get spared. If a righteous person lived in the city, and they had property in another place outside the city, in other people's hands, Ein machrimim oisai, they don't get destroyed. Av nechasim sheish lam ba'oisai ir, but if they have property in the city, even though they themselves don't get punished, their property gets destroyed. V'tamim mefurish lakaman, and the reason why their property gets destroyed will be explained in a second, although they didn't serve idols. So if you just break it down a little bit, where do we see this halachically? Lot had to run away. Everything in the city, it doesn't say Lot was able to take anything. Lot had to leave. His property in the city was destroyed, although he was spared. His property was destroyed. We'll learn about that next. I think it's next week or 2 weeks. So if you look at Rashi, just to be medayik, 2 things. It says mufkadim. The word mufkadim means deposited. It's deposited somewhere else. I don't know why does it say deposited. It could say being somewhere else. But yad acherim, other people are holding it. It means it's not like you have a house in another city, but someone else is holding your property, meaning your movable objects. Okay, we'll see if that makes any difference when we learn the laws more in detail with the Talmud. Now we're learning the Brisa. Amr Rab Shimon. Now Rab Shimon, who's Dorish time in the Dekra. Rab Shimon, talking about Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. He wants to help us understand why. Why does the pasuk say? From the fact that the Torah says, Eskol HaShabbat, we learned that the righteous property in the city gets destroyed. Reb Shimon says, why? What did the righteous person do? He or she didn't serve idols. Why did they stay in the city? Why didn't they leave? When they see a city so corrupt, why didn't they pack their bags and leave, right? People asking the question today, with all the municipality elections that are going on, if you don't like it, leave. Why are you staying there? Why? Because memainam. They want to keep their property. They want to keep their money. It's financially worth it for them to stay there, even though they don't agree with the politics or behavior of the city. The fikach memainam avitz, God says, the Torah says, your money kept you in a city of Rishayim, of wicked people. You weren't ready to have principles and move. So the money kept you there, your money will be destroyed. Amar Mar, we learned before. It's called Shlala Tikbites. What does it mean that you have to gather all the spoils? The rabbis Nichnasei Rishayim Shebechutzla comes to add, but the wicked people's property, even outside the city, gets brought into the city. Amar Reb Chizda uvanik batzim l'saychai. Reb Chizda says, and this is the halacha only with regard to property that can be gathered in the city. Means if a person has real estate outside the city, that doesn't get destroyed. It's only movable objects. That's called metaltalin. So if they have metaltalin, maybe that's why Rashi says that b'yad acherim. Someone has to be holding on to it. But maybe if it's movable objects, not b'yad acherim, maybe possibly the law would be differently. Okay, Amar Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says, this is Rashi. B'chol duchti darsh Rab Shimon time of the Torah. Rashi teaches us that Reb Shimon always tries to help us understand. I mean, in theory, we don't have to ask any questions. The Torah says that the righteous people's property gets destroyed in the city, and outside the city gets spared. So Reb Shimon says, why? That if it's called shala means to say all the spoils to include that even property of the wicked. So we have 2 types of people here. We have the person who lives in the city, the person who's righteous. Why is it? So it's the money that's in the city that kept him there. If you have no business in the city, so why did you stay there, Taka? It means if you have no reason to stay there just because you like to go hiking there, I mean, really, the only reason you stay there is financial reasons. So the financial reasons are in the city, so the financial reasons that kept you in the city gets destroyed. Where property outside the city has nothing to do with it. Whereas the wicked people, it's not a punishment about the property. The property didn't cause them to sin. They're wicked, they sin. So therefore, anything that belongs to them gets destroyed. So Rabbis Nichse Shem Shebechutzla. Amar Rab Chizda. Rab Chizda gives a condition. Hold on, Aaron. Hold on to that thought. Just finish the Rashi here. Amar Rab Chizda. Rab Chizda said, "Ubenikbatzim l'saychai that nichse rishayim that the wicked people's property hakroivim li'ir that is close to the city shecholim nekabtzim l'saychai that you're able to bring them to the city." So Rashi learns that what does it mean that you're able to bring in the city? Not so much like I said before, that's only movable objects. But even movable objects, they have to be movable objects that could come into the city that same day. If someone owns something, a property of material, that would take a week or 2 days even to get to the city, then that doesn't get destroyed. and assuming that goes to the Yorshim, to the people who inherit. Only property that's so close that within 24 hours or day could come into the city. Sorry, those property get brought in and destroyed and burnt in the city. If you have property, that can't be brought into the city within a day, they don't get lost. And there's another condition. The property once had to be in the city. If you buy something that's let's say today, what would be today if you buy an Amazon purchase that you paid money for it to be delivered that same day, and it's coming from outside the city, but it's your property. You own, it means you paid for it, although the person who owns it, who's selling it to you, has responsibility to deliver it to you. But maybe does that property get burnt? So it says no. Even if it comes that same day, if it hasn't arrived yet, then it had to have one spin in the city. It was once in the city, but now someone else is holding on to it. But if you have property that never was in the city, even if it's within one day, would be an example. In those days, they didn't have Amazon. Let's say the day that right next door to your city, you inherit something from someone that you inherit, but you never brought the property into the city. Like Karin and Bashalal, it's not considered spoils. That money doesn't get lost. Okay, this is Rashi. We're going to learn the Rambam in a second. Yes, Aaron, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah. Okay. So what if does this apply to someone who stays in the city to either A, reform it, B, become the government and then reform it, but there's days you're not the government, or you're trying to be and you may never be, or you're the only righteous person in the whole city, or there's a couple of you. Does this apply?
Again,
okay, the first question, let's go with the first one. If you want to reform the city, you're staying there to reform the bad people who are in there.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying. That you're saying if the reason why in the city, that if Rab Shimon says the reason is that the money kept you in the city, but here you're coming to the city to help the city. You're trying to change it, and you happen to be there more than 30 days, and you have. So that's a good question. It doesn't seem like there's any difference that there's any law that says that if your intention wasn't financial, that your finances should be protected.
What about if it's
a good question what you're asking, but I hear both of them. It doesn't say any. It doesn't say anywhere in the Talmud that if you could prove that the reason you stayed in the city was not financial, but you were looking to actually help the city to change it. So then that's a good. I mean, listen. Maybe the Talmud says that if you're there for 30 days plus, and you haven't had any effect on the city to the extent that they still worship idol in a communal way, so obviously maybe you should don't quit your day job and maybe stay out of politics. And the fact that you stayed that long and you still weren't able to affect it. Again, we find with Lot. Lot was he tried to argue a little bit, but when he tried to protect the angels, but that didn't help much. Okay, let's say but they're both very good questions. Okay, so again, so the condition that Rashi teaches us is that Reb Chizda says that it has to be close to the city, is that it has to be not just things that are movable, but also has to be movable things that have one spin in the city, and two could get to the city within a day. So let's see what the Rambam says. There are several explanations to this expression. Some explain that the reference is to animals that enter the city and gather there each night. Okay, so the Meiri says that we know there's halacha it's in many places in halacha we talk about the farmers the farmers who have animals. Like if you go to the Golden Heights, right, there's cows walking all over the place, but they belong to people and they come back to their place at night. So the question is, do they get destroyed? The animals also get destroyed in the city of idol worship. So what kind of animals get destroyed? So the Meiri says that it's talking about animals that are within one day. If you have an animal that kind of walks around and comes back once a week to back to its owner, so that you don't go looking for the animal that's a day further away than a day or further out of the city. Some explain that the reference is to property that is occasionally brought into the city and not property that was never in the city, which he quotes the Rama as see Rashi, which we just learned. The Rambam explains that the reference is to any property that is in the city when it is designated as an idolatrous city. It means the Rambam doesn't give all the conditions. Rambam understood the way I understood initially. It's not about if it was in or wasn't in, or if it's a day or not a day. If it's in the city, it gets burnt. If it's not in the city, it doesn't. Anything that was there when it was designated gets burnt. Even if it leaves afterwards, if you try to send your property out, doesn't help. They gather it back and they bring it back in. The property of the wicked in an adulterous city that was deposited in another city, if it is gathered with the rest of if it is gathered with the rest of the city's property, it is burnt with it, and if not, it is given to the inhabitants, the heirs, in accordance with the opinion of Rab Chizda. Okay, this is the Rambam in the laws of Mada. So he says over there, I'm not sure what he means over that. Deposit another, if it is gathered with the rest of the city's property. It doesn't. What does it mean if it's gathered? You have to decide if you're going to gather it or not. I'm not sure if he's referring to what he says on top, then is that when it was designated. The word if over here seems to be a little questionable. Okay, let's continue. Amr Rav Chizda. What about another case? Pikdoinois shel anshe Ir Hanidachas mutarim. That Rav Chizda says the deposits of the inhabitants of an adulterous city are permitted, means they're not destroyed. So what we just said, that in certain cases it gets brought back in. Heichidami. What are we talking about over here? I lema di Ir Acheres v'isnu begava. So if we're talking about that Rav Chizda is referring to property belonging to the inhabitants of another city, that the property itself is someone else's property, and it's just deposited within the adulterous city, means someone else owns something and lent it to someone else in the city that's of idol worship. So pshita dimutarim, for sure it doesn't. It means, why should it get burnt? Lav shlolu, it's not the spoils of the city. It didn't belong to the city. It's someone. If you rent a car or an animal, and everything's getting burnt in an adulterous city, but it's not yours. You just rented it or you borrowed it. We're talking about your property. So your property means the person who lives in the city of idol worship in the Ir Hanidachas has property in another city. We just said before that. Who said before? It was Rav Chizda himself said that if you, let's say according to Rashi, if it's within one day, so then why should it? We just said it doesn't get spared. So, and if it can't be gathered in, we already said before that if it can't be gathered in, it's not included. So what is Reb Chizda adding in this statement what he said before? Let's just see the Rashi. If it belongs to the person of the city of the Ir Hanidachas, of the city of idol worship, and is deposited in another city, if it's further than 30 days, further than a day away, let's just take Rashi's opinion. So then we already described the definition of when does the property get brought back in the city or not. Why are we repeating ourselves? Again, he quotes the Rambam, property belonging to inhabitants of another city. He quotes the question. Let's say another city, someone who owns property and lends it or rents it to someone else, and that person lives in a city of Ir Hanidachas that was deposited within the wicked, with the wicked in an adulterous city, even if the wicked assumed financial responsibility for the property, is not burnt in the city. So here the Rambam adds the Chiddush. The Chiddush is that what he says in the Gemara afterwards, that even though the person took responsibility, so you would think that let him burn it, because it really belongs, so to say, almost the responsibility makes a kind of ownership, and therefore it gets burnt. And however he pays it back is something else, because all his property gets burnt. Maybe he has other properties that's not close enough that he could use to pay it up, or there becomes now a responsibility of the children to pay the debt of the father. But either way, one would think that because you assumed responsibility, the Rambam says that it would be burnt. It says no. Just another thing in the Rambam, if you want to just be medayik, he says, if we're assuming Rabbi Steinsaltz is translating the word for word of the Rambam, he says that was deposited with the wicked in an adulterous city. It means that if it was deposited by the righteous in an adulterous city, it seems that there would be a difference. It means even though the halacha says that there's a difference that any property in the city gets burnt if it belongs to a resident of the city, even if the person is righteous. So why does the Rambam have to say that we're talking about deposited with a rasha, with a wicked person? The same question would apply to the righteous. But it seems like that there's a difference because the righteous person, it's your money that kept you there. This is for sure not your money. So there wouldn't even be a havamina. There wouldn't even be a thought to say that if a righteous person has a rent or something that was lent to him or her or if they rented it or lent it or borrowed it, whatever. So there, it's not your money that kept you there. It's not for sure not a question. But the wicked person that all his property or her property gets burned. It's not about because the money kept you there. It's about anything that belongs to the sinner. So you would think that if he took financial responsibility to pay it up, then maybe it would be considered theirs. Nevertheless, the Rambam says it's not considered theirs, based on what the Gemara answers here. Again, in their I'm not sure Ariel has the actual hard copy of Rabbi Steinsaltz. He always seems to be on the soft copy over here. They sometimes put things too soon. Like this piece should be underneath the next piece. Either way, the Gemara answers, the Ir Hanidachas. We're talking about property that belongs to another city. The mafkidi b'soichi that was deposited in the city of idol worship. And here we're talking about going to kabbalah achrayas. The person accepted responsibility. That if anything happens to the property, I'll pay you money. So we would think, I would have thought, even the kabbalah achrayas, because I took responsibility on it, kididei dami, that becomes like yours. And the responsibility is a level of ownership. Kamash Milan comes to teach us that, and Rabbi Chizah says no. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says the Kabbalah Achrayas b'nei Ir Hanidachas. That Rashi doesn't doesn't make a difference between if the person is, we're talking about a wicked person or a righteous person. Rashi says anyone who's in the city in Ir Hanidachas, you would have thought that if I took responsibility means a level of ownership and therefore would be destroyed. And however you pay it up, it's whatever. That's not the Torah's problem, so to say. The Torah doesn't have to consider that. How are you going to pay it up if all your property is destroyed, etc. Rambam seems to say it's talking about the question of the Talmud over here is about a wicked person. Whereas a righteous person, maybe there wouldn't have been a thought to even say that the property should be destroyed because the point is that your property that you own in the city that kept you there, this is not your property. So why would that be burnt? Maybe that's how the Rambam understands it. Okay. The Gemara continues. Rav Chizda says like this: what happens if you are a partner in property? You own property, but you also have a partner in that, and the partner doesn't live in the city, right? So he says like this. Let me get back to the place over here. An animal that, let's say, belongs half to a member of the city of the idol worship and half to someone else who doesn't live in the city. So we say asura, the animal is still forbidden. We'll see what the Gemara is coming to teach us. Isa, what happens if you have a doe? Doe is that belongs. You have a partnership in doe. Half of the doe belongs to the person that lives in the city of idol worship, and the other half belongs to someone who doesn't live in the city. Then the doe is permitted. Why? Behema command the poligdam. Behema command the light poligadami. We'll see what that means in a second. The animal is not considered as divided. It's one animal, and part of that animal, and part of 50% of all of the animal is forbidden. And so therefore the whole animal becomes forbidden. Isa command the pligadami. We'll see how there's two ways of learning this in a second. The dough is as if it's divided. So if you have, let's say, 5 pounds of dough. So we say that 2.5 pounds belongs to the city of idol worship, and that gets burnt, and the other 2.5 doesn't. So you could take the partner could take his or her part and say it's nothing to do. I could divide it because it's not a live thing. The dough, every part of dough is really separate. It just happens to be one big dough. We're going to see this is a question of Bereira or not. But Rashi, let's see how Rashi learns it. Command the light polig, an animal is as if it's not divided. Why? Here he explains what we're talking about. Rashi explains. It's impossible. We're talking about what's the case over here? You have an animal that belongs to the city of idol worship. The verdict was passed. You slaughtered it. So now you did the kosher shechita. And now you want to say, okay, give me half the animal. So he says no. Why? Because in order for you to eat a olive amount of the meat, you need shechita. You need to have, it has to be slaughtered halachically. But you can't slaughter it. Why? Because the animal has to be destroyed. When you slaughtered it, it's as if you killed it. It doesn't have the kosher effect, so to say, of slaughtering, because the animal has to be put to death. You just chose to put it to death by slaughtering it. But the Torah doesn't consider, even though technically you did all the motions and the halachic, it fits the law, so to say, the bill of shechita, but you just, as far as the Torah is concerned, you didn't slaughter it. Meaning to say, we have to understand something. This what Rashi's learning is going into the question like this. What's the difference between an animal that is slaughtered halachically and an animal that's, let's say, not slaughtered halachically? You kill an animal, right? If you go to the supermarket and you have kosher meat and non-kosher meat. Non-kosher meat is considered a nevela. Halachically, if you touch non-kosher meat, you can become tummy. The kosher meat is tahar, it's pure. Doesn't make you tummy. It's permissible to eat. What's the difference between kosher and non-kosher meat? The shechita elevates. The word shechita, also words like chassidus, like limshach, it elevates the food to be permissible. That only, so even though, and how do you do it? The Torah says you have to slaughter it a certain way, and has all the laws of kosher. This animal is already has to be put to death because it's part of a city of Ir Hanidachas. It is one animal. You can't cut it in half because it's alive. So now this animal has to be put to death. So the fact that you slaughtered it doesn't make the meat kosher now, because the ability to elevate this food to be edible and not to be considered a nevela, a dead piece of meat, is only if it's permissible animal. But this animal is not permissible. So therefore, as far as the Torah is concerned, is as if you shot the animal, and therefore never became kosher, and therefore the partner can't eat from the meat. It's destined to be killed. The fact that you slaughtered it just the way you killed it, never became permissible. Meaning to say that meat has to become permissible. Slaughtering it makes the meat permissible. And that's the only way the meat's edible. But if you shoot it or you kill it in another way, non-shchita, not slaughtering, it stays in a veil, it stays a dead animal. Because it had a verdict of being killed, you chose to kill it by slaughtering, but it never gets the heter, the permissible of eating the meat, which is very much connected to this week's parsha, right? We learned this week's parsha, Noach is told that you're allowed to eat from meat. So even the part that doesn't belong to the city is the partnership of someone else. Because the animal is only one animal, so when you slaughtered the animal, there was no way to slaughter the animal to make it kosher. There's no half animal over here that you can make kosher, and therefore the whole animal is also is not permissible to eat. It doesn't go into over here. What about the other benefits from the animal? Can you sell it to non-Jew? Can you use its hide for yourself? Could you feed it to your animals? We're talking about if it's permissible to eat. Isa, the dough, you could use as bread. Call Amos the boy polyglot, because then you could have divided it right away. So we don't consider the half of the dough that belongs to the partner to be part of the half of the dough that's not from the partner. You can choose if you have 5 pounds of dough that makes 5 loaves of bread. You could throw half of the dough out and make 2.5 loaves of bread, or you could make 5 loaves of bread. So you don't need to use all the dough to make bread. So therefore, the Torah considers as if the dough could be. Rashi's not using. There's another question. There's another idea of the Gemara asks that something that can be divided, is it divided or not? An animal cannot be divided. A live animal cannot be divided. Once you divide an animal, it dies. Dough could be divided, but Rashi doesn't go into that idea. Rashi says it seems to understand from the Gemara we're talking about a question of it's permissible to eat. This animal cannot be slaughtered kosher because half of it is destined to be killed, and therefore the shechita doesn't help. And therefore, if you slaughter it, it's not going to make it permissible to eat. The dough, it's kosher dough, And we consider as if 2.5 pounds doesn't belong to you, belongs to someone else, and he can turn it into bread, or she. Let's see the Rambam, and then we'll go to the other opinions. Okay. The Rambam says a living animal is a single entity and cannot be divided into two. Therefore, if any part of the animal is forbidden, the prohibition applies to the entire animal. That is not the case with regard to dough, as if the portion belonging to the idolatrous city must be destroyed. The remainder of the dough is unaffected. So says the Ramah. Other commentaries cite a variant reading concerning the distinction, as it is impossible to render an olive bulk of meat permitted without slaughter. Accordingly, the Gemara explains as follows. Ritual slaughter requires slicing both of the windpipe and the gullet. Since the animal stands to be destroyed, the status of the organ that is belonging to the adulterous city is that of an organ that has already been severed. Therefore, the ritual slaughter cannot render the animal permitted. This is not the case with regard to dough, which he quotes. He doesn't say Rashi, but this is what we just learned in Rashi, Rabbeinu David and the Ran. Not sure why he doesn't quote Rashi, but he just learned that in Rashi. But the Ramah basically says, like I said before, the Yad Ramah says it's just a question of an animal's alive, you can't divide it. In a dough, you could divide. So therefore, an animal that belongs to a partnership is not permitted, and the Yad and the dough is. Whereas the second opinion is what he quotes from Rashi, or he calls it the Ran, is that the shechita doesn't help. The difference would be, seemingly, if, according to the Ramah, it seems like you can't have any benefit from the animal. Seemingly. Not even after it dies, you can't use its skin, you can't sell it to a non-Jew as non-kosher meat, you can't feed it to your animals. According to Rashi, it seems like you would be able to. It's just a question of shechita, if it's been kosher meat. But otherwise, you're 50%, why should it be burnt? And dough, everyone agrees, obviously, that it's not, you can divide it. Animal dough. An animal owned partially by an inhabitant of an adulterous city is forbidden, as the animal cannot be divided while alive. Dough owned partially by an inhabitant of the adulterous city, only that part is burnt, while the part owned by the other is permitted, as it can be divided. So this is the Rambam holds clearly like the Yad Ramah. Again, I have no basis to say what I'm saying, but seemingly the Rashi goes into complicated explanations, but he could have just said the simple explanation. The Yad Ramah's explanation means, what the Yad Ramah is saying is the question of Yesh Breira, Ein Breira. How do we look at something at the time of judgment? The animal is a single animal. The animal alive, as it is alive, cannot be divided. Because once it's divided, it's no longer alive. So therefore, the whole animal gets judged, because you can't separate any part of the animal. So therefore, seemingly, the entire animal gets burnt, and everything about the animal gets burnt. There's no benefit to the partner. Where dough could be divided, even though it's not divided right now, but it's very simple to divide dough, and it doesn't change the status of the dough. It just becomes less dough. I mean, if you have 5 pounds, it becomes 2.5 pounds, but still can make a loaf of bread, right? So, but according to Rashi says the question is not about the permissible of the value of the animal. The question is only a question of the shechita. If you slaughter an animal that's destined to be destroyed, because half of it has to be destroyed already, and the verdict has already been passed, the shechita doesn't help, and therefore it's not considered kosher meat for consumption. Okay. So again, let's try to see if there's anything here in the commentaries. Hold on a second. Now, yeah, so he brings that over here, that's how Rashi learns it. He says the Rashash, which seems to be what the Yad Ramah says, it's a question of breira or not. Again, the difference would be if the animal's value after it's killed is permissible to be used by the partner or not. I'm assuming that could be the question. Maybe I'm just talking out of line, but from Rashi, it seems like there's no reason why the partner can't take financial benefit, although he can't sell it or use it or eat it as kosher meat, but he could sell it to a non-Jew or sell it to give it to his animals, etc. Reb Chiz asks a question. Behemoth Ir Hanidachas ma'u this is haneba shchita letarim de nevela. So the question is like this: if a person slaughters an animal, like I said before, the animal becomes kosher meat. If you walk into a supermarket today, we're not so careful with the laws of purity and impurity. But if you walk into a supermarket, UFC, and you pick up a piece of non-kosher meat, you become tamei. You become impure. A piece of non-kosher meat is tummy, makes you tummy. You pick it up, you touch non-kosher meat, you become tummy. If you walk into the supermarket, and if you were to go into the temple afterwards, you're like a person who's impure goes into the temple. It's punishable by death. If you go into the supermarket and you pick up the same looking steak that's kosher, you don't become impure. Kosher meat doesn't give impurity. Only a nevela. Nevela means not just an animal that just died. A nevela means any animal that was not shechted, that wasn't slaughtered halachically. So the question is, let's say you slaughter this animal that's in a partnership of a person that lives in the city and a person that lives outside the city. So is it now become pure that it no longer has the status of a nevela, which means it's no longer it doesn't give you tumah, it doesn't give you impurity. The Torah says you have to destroy the animal by a sword. Doesn't make a difference if you slaughter it by slaughtering it or if you behead it from the back. Because it has to be destroyed, it's destroyed. Or we say maybe the shechita helps to not make it a nevela, but it still has to be destroyed. You can't keep it, but at least you don't become tamei. The Gemara says teiku. The fact that the Gemara says teiku means we don't know the answer. It means to say that Rashi says about eating, but from the way Rashi words it, we learned before, it's mashma, it's not a question of just eating. The mashma, it stays tummy as well. It's an avela. Rashi says, Rashi says. So it looks like Rashi understands the verdict of teiku means to say that the shechita does not help, and it stays in avela. Because Rashi says that the shechita meant nothing, which means it's as if you shot the animal, or you killed it with the sword in another way, and the animal remains in avela. Let's see if Rashi helps us here. And we'll stop here. The bein b'shchita, bein b'ariga, krinin bei l'fei charev. Doesn't make a difference if you slaughter it or if you kill it with a sword by beheading the animal, not in a halachic kosher way. When you slaughtered it, you killed it because it's destined to be killed. It doesn't help at all, like the Rashi said before. Maybe look at it differently. The Torah means that if you have to kill it with the sword, not by slaughtering it, halachically. If you killed it by slaughtering it, it doesn't help you eat it. If I'm continuing from the previous Rashi, but it's no longer an avela, it doesn't give off impurity. The nehida la'achila is asra, like Rashi said before, you can't eat it. At least it should be no longer purified. It should no longer give you impurity if you touch it. You can't have enough of it. Rashi adds over here also isra hana. Midei nevela dehida achila is asra v'isra hanahu aval tiheni litara midei nevela. It seems that maybe isra hanahu, the isra is also. Maybe according to Rashi also agrees that the partner can't even sell it, even though Rashi seems to be learning a little differently. But okay, either way, the Gemara doesn't give a conclusion to this question. It means if it remains in a veil or not. All right, let's just finish off this Rambam. The carcass of a domesticated or undomesticated animal. Mm-hmm. Whether it is kosher or non-kosher, is a primary source of ritual impurity that transmits impurity via contact with and carrying of an item. Unlike a human corpse, it does not transmit impurity in a tent. It means you have to touch it. If you're in a room with a dead animal, if you walk into QFC, you don't become temeh, right? Even though it's an enclosure. One who comes into contact with or carries without contact an animal corpse assumes first-degree ritual impurity status, which means you become impure. And then actually, like I said, if you walk into the temple or you touch truma, all these things, you make it impure, and it's halachically a severe transgression. This is not applicable to today's times because we're not careful with it, but in temple times. This is the halachic. This is the halacha with regard to all large mammals, in other words, cats and bears, to the exclusion of small mammals like rodents, whose status is that of a creeping animal, which is a separate category of impurity. The status of a kosher animal that was ritually slaughtered, this has to be kosher animal and ritually slaughtered. It is not of an animal. It's not of an animal carcass. It's not an avela, but that of a slaughtered animal that may be eaten and does not transmit impurity. The status of a kosher animal that died in a way other than ritual slaughter is that of an animal carcass. That means if you kill a cow, any non-kosher cow, meaning if it wasn't slaughtered, it's considered an avela. Again, if you pick up non-kosher meat in the supermarket, you become tameh. It may not be eaten and imparts ritual impurity. Non-kosher animals may not be eaten regardless of how they died, and they impart impurity even if they were ritually slaughtered. A kosher animal with a wound, what about a treifa? What happens if the shochat slaughters an animal and investigates, checks the animal's lungs, all the things that make an animal kosher, and says that, not, even if you slaughter the animal, you can't just eat it. You have to make sure it's not treif. Treif doesn't mean non-kosher. Treif means that it has the condition that the Torah says it would live for 12 months, right? So let's say it has a wound or a condition that will cause it to die, which means it's a treifa. Within 12 months, it is a treifa. It may not be eaten. So the meat can't be eaten. If it was slaughtered, it does not impart impurity. So this is the difference. So there's three categories. Any non-kosher animal or a kosher animal that was not slaughtered is an avela, is a carcass, and it gives impurity. An animal that's kosher and slaughtered, so then it's tahor, it becomes pure and doesn't give off impurity. What about a kosher animal that was slaughtered halachically, but found to be non-kosher, meaning treif, because there's other things that make an animal non-edible, like if the animal was sick or has a wound. It's called a treifa. That's halachically called a treifa. So it's not allowed to be eaten, but if it was slaughtered halachically, it's not considered an avela. It doesn't give off impurity. Finally, for instance, I'll give you an example. Today, we have, let's say, kosher meats, and we have halal, right? Halal, let's say, is what's considered Muslim permissible according to Islam. Now, their laws, they require slaughtering, but they don't have the laws of treifas. It means they don't have the same laws of kosher to the extent that if you see something wrong with the animal, it can't be eaten. So what do they do today? Let's say you have a slaughterhouse. Sometimes you could slaughter animals 40, 50, back in the day, you had no idea. Today, I think they're better, but you could have 40, 50, or 70% of the animals that you slaughter non-kosher. You do everything right, but you check it. It's not a kosher animal. It's a treifa. What do they do today? The Muslim community buy it off. They're shipping constantly slaughtered meats that have not passed the laws of kashrus get sold to Saudi Arabia, because for them it's fine. That's what they say. It's not a misunderstanding. They know our laws. They know their laws. For their laws, it's fine. They buy it at a discount. So that meat that they sell to Saudi Arabia is not an avela and doesn't give off impurity. Finally, although an animal neither becomes impure or transmits impurity while alive, the status of limbs savored from a living animal is that of an animal carcass, and they do transmit ritual impurity. Again, these are all brought down a little bit, indicated in the laws of this week's parsha, when we learn about we learn about Eivim Minachai and the laws of eating meat. Although they're talking to Gentiles, the 7 Noahide laws doesn't talk about shechita, but we start to get an idea about what foods are permissible or not. Okay, we're going to continue to learn next week the laws of wigs. What about a wig that belongs to a person? There's different understanding of the question. But a wig that belongs to a person of Ir Hanidachas, is the wig able to be used? Or the hair of a woman who's going to be killed, is that hair sellable, or it has to be burnt? Either way, we'll tackle that issue next week. Thank you all for joining. Laila Tov, Shavua Tov. Take care.
Thanks, Rabbi.